What is going on, y'all? I'm Cam Best. I am joined by Lamby series. I'm not going to try pointing this time. I've gotten it wrong 2 times in a row. Oh, he just got it wrong. Okay.
Oh, I got it
All
wrong,
right.
man.
All right. As always, we are 8 Cubes, and we are here to talk about the 8 most important topics in Marvel Snap, starting with the newest card to come out. That's going to be Mobius M. Mobius, 2 cost, 3 power. And he has the incredibly unique ability of saying cards that you have cannot have their costs increased, and cards that your opponent has cannot have their costs reduced. A lot of people are predicting this to be the end of the Loki meta, or at least a big shakeup to the Loki meta, because Loki, of course, manages to reduce the cost of the cards that he gives you. What are your thoughts on Mobius as a card, specifically in the context of changing the Loki meta, Lamby?
Well, firstly, I feel like Mobius will be like Luke Cage in the high evolutionary meta. It's
Yeah.
like everyone will just get it and put it in their deck because it's firstly cheap, it's 2 costs, and in order to combat what potentially would be like a Mobius wave meta or whatever, you kind of need your own Mobius as well. Specifically to Loki, honestly, I don't actually think it will end Loki's reign as the top dog because, like, at the end of the day, right? Just think about it this way: like, I can still Loki into your Mobius, and it's gonna cost 1. So, like, there is that thing, right? There is that thing to think about, like, outside of the obvious, like, Loki stuff. But like, no, I don't think it's gonna end Loki's reign by much, but it would probably reduce the popularity of Loki for sure because like the general consensus now is that Mobius stops cost reduction, so Loki bad, that kind of thing. But like I don't think it's gonna stay for long. Maybe give it 48, 72 hours, people will still realize that hey, this doesn't really hurt Loki that badly. But that is my speculation. I don't know for sure, but I'm curious to see if it's actually gonna be that way.
I have a similar thought where I just sort of think that, like, all right, this is a card I think you need to have in the meta to give non-Loki decks like some hope, right?
Yes.
There's like a world where we can do okay, I got it, right? Like we have like a Shadow King Mobius Darkhawk deck, right? And then we can
Yes.
actually play fair Marvel Snap again. But I don't know if that's actually going to work. And I'm interested to see if it will.
Oh, having said that, you just mentioned a very cool point, which is like, let's say you go something like Mobius plus Wave, right? One of the very premium like 2 cost cards you can play on the turn 6 is actually Shadow King.
Yeah.
Like Shadow King plus a Doom is crazy strong, so that one definitely worth exploring.
So that brings us into topic number 2, specific decks you want to play with Mobius. I think I want to try just playing some fair Marvel Snap again. I want to try some Darkhawk stuff. I want to just be like, all right, look, if you get my cards, they aren't drastically better for you. Because I think people think about like a 1-cost discount, like, oh, it's a 1-cost discount. It's not a 1-cost discount. Think of it like a multiplier on the card. If you give them a 2-cost card that gets discounted to 1, their card is 50% better than yours. If you give them a 3-cost card that gets discounted to 2, their card is 33% better than yours, right? Like they're getting cards that are a lot better than yours. And that's to say nothing of the fact that cards are designed on a curve, right? Like it's not linear. You know, Thing is a 4/6 and Hulk is a 6/12, right? So again, it like just saying, 50%, 33%, that's just talking about energy. When you mess up the energy curve of a deck like that, you're getting cards that are like a lot better than what you're actually playing. And that has pushed mid-range decks like Darkhawk significantly out of the format. And I'm wondering if we could just get it to a point where they're not getting cards that are better than ours, and they're just getting the cards, is that enough for a mid-range deck to exist again?
On that note, I also think one thing I would like to explore when it comes to Mobius decks is basically with Silk, right? Silk Wave Mobius kind of stuff. Because one of the, like we mentioned in the first topic, like playing Shadow King alongside like Doctor Doom is crazy. Like if you go Mobius Wave, that kind of thing. But the Silk deck has one of the best 2-cost cards in the game, which is just Silk, right? You can go Silk, you can go like Mobius Wave, and then you can Silk plus Doom, Silk plus Alioth on like turn 6. I'm just thinking of ways to like actually abuse Mobius with Wave, and like what other 2-cost cards would be great in that slot. Like I don't know, maybe we see the resurgence of Mojo. Okay, that might be a bit too much, but like
I don't think we're gonna see the resurgence of Mojo.
nah, but like yeah.
The interesting thing though is like you called out Shadow King, right? Like
Yeah,
Shadow King as one of those options, and the wave deck, the move wave deck doesn't actually have that as an option. The move wave deck
that's
doesn't get to be a
true.
Shadow King deck. What I find interesting is like you look at the current crop of wave decks. High Evolutionary Wave is built to be a soak wave deck. It's not actually going to be playing cards alongside Doctor Doom. It's not built for that. The move wave deck can't play Shadow King. Is there another mid range shell that we could be investigating that has that same capability that could actually play Shadow King Doom? That's how I ended up on Darkhawk, right? Where it's like, all right, we just get to play all this really strong stuff and then hope it's good enough. And hope we don't
Yeah.
get Loki'd. Because right now, Darkhawk gets Loki'd and it's just like, I see. You've done what I do, but better. And Move Wave is like that too. But at least at least Darkhawk can play Shadow King is sort of where my thought process was that. We get to play like a bunch of awesome 2/3s. Here's one for you. What about Sarah? Is that just like completely dead? You never want to do that because everyone's gonna play Mobius? Is
I
that where we're
mean,
at?
I'm not enticed by the idea of playing Sarah like now and even
Ever?
in the
Yeah.
future because, like, I mean, Mobius firstly will be everywhere. I mean, it's been hyped up so much. I don't see how a Sarah that can survive
Yeah.
right now. Like, well, what's the? Yeah, I don't think so. I
Okay.
don't think it can
So if
happen.
let's take it the other direction. What if we just play something that doesn't care about Mobius at all, like Shuri?
That works.
See, like
I think that
that's
works.
like just like completely go op. Like I don't care about this. I'm gonna play one card a turn anyway. I don't here. Go nuts. And then all the Loki decks are getting inbred against the Mobius decks, and we're just doing something that's like fundamentally very good.
Actually, this is quite funny, right? Like you just said. So Loki decks sort of drop in popularity because of Mobius's rise, whether it's actually going to be good or not. Then the Shuri deck is just there, unaffected by Mobius. Shuri deck's also technically good into Loki, like Shuri Sauron.
I don't
So
know if it's
I think it's
actually good enough.
actually
It's like playable, right? Like it's
it's
better
it's not
than
bad, yeah.
yeah, it's better than like Evo Wave in that
So
matchup.
it's probably kind of well positioned actually, like looking into the next few days, Shuri
Yeah.
Sauron as a deck.
Next, let's move on to Loki mirrors. I know the popular conception of Loki mirrors at this point is like, it's all RNG, but I think both you and I would agree, given our respective win rates in Loki mirrors, that there's actually some things going on there. That said, it does sort of do the typical card game thing, which is when two players are of roughly equal skill with roughly the same deck, a lot of it is going to be RNG.
Yeah.
Like there are not a lot of those matchups on ladder and in conquest especially where both players are going to be of the same exact skill level. So I wanted to talk about a couple of the tips that I had for how to deal with Loki mirrors. First off, the number one priority you have is keeping your board space not clogged while developing as much power as you can and Lokiing for the largest number you can. A lot of people I see in Loki mirrors just don't even think about it, play a Quinjet on turn one. I don't know about that play unless you have a lot of ways to fill your hand back up. I want to be Lokiing for 7 as much as I possibly can, which usually means turn 4 after a Coulson. I'm looking for Snowguard and Loki. And the idea there is just the more shots I have at their Loki, the more shots I have to do what I like to call going exponential, which is when you just like you go collector Loki into collector Loki into collector Loki into collector Loki and just do the whole thing that's like what made the mirrors so famous for that. You play to set that up. There's also, of course, the games where neither of you get to have Loki, and there are like some reasonable considerations in those games as well. But I think just more fundamentally, it's very unlikely for any Marvel Snap game to come purely down to RNG, or at least if your opponent is bad enough that you can play out of it regardless. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so the mirror actually has a lot of like simple nuances that if you follow, you probably will have an edge over your
Yeah.
opponent. Like KM has already mentioned, the whole bot space being super important, right? You don't want to fill your bot with weenies, and if you do, then if you Loki, you don't get to play stuff anyway. You also want to Loki with a significant hand size because your early game largely doesn't matter outside of the actual collector into Loki because like
Yep.
collector is a power spike that grows exponentially every time you generate a card, right? So that one can be on the board, it's fine. And Loki itself, after you play the card, your hand is so cheap for the most part. You can fill the board like on turn 5 and 6, even if you've done really nothing much from turn 1 to 3. So I feel like having a significant hand size to Loki is very important. And also I feel like one thing, especially in Conquest, that I've noticed where there's like 10 cubes and stuff, and that people tend to overvalue their Loki hands a lot. Like people I've seen people stay with like Angela after a snap without a collector, without a Loki. They stay with Angela, Quinjet. And I'm like, this is not the kitty deck. This is not
Yeah, you
like the
can't do
silk
that.
deck. This is a Loki mirror. You need the big power spikes. You need the collectors, you need the Lokis. Like, so a lot of people like they overvalue their Loki hands. And Loki does have a lot of nice hands, right? Like you see pairings of like Angela plus Kitty and like, oh, that looks great. But in the mirror it's not good enough. You need collector, you need Loki. So
I mean,
overvaluing your hands
yeah.
in the mirror is one way to lose a lot of extra cubes.
You say it's not good enough. I would go so far as to say it's like actively not good. Like
Yeah.
the thing that matters in the mirror is fundamentally Lokiing. You can get out of it sometimes, but you need to be like, I think there's this instinct in a lot of card gamers that you can play to your outs in various situations. But the thing about Marvel Snap is you need to consider whether playing to your outs is worth the raised stakes. You need to
Correct.
consider whether the value you're getting from the ability to play to your outs is worth doubling the stakes. Because when you're talking about playing to your outs, like if you're like, 33% to win or whatever, that's one thing. But if your opponent has Loki and you don't, you are probably significantly less than 33% to win that game. So like you need to be thinking about like, yeah, you could play out of it. You could, but is it worth it is a completely different question.
I think one funny thing to mention and one thing to like add to that as well is that like technically playing to your outs in Marvel Snap is also knowing when to not play, so you have like cubes
Yes.
left to play the next one, especially in Conquest
Yes.
whereby like that one extra cube that you chose to play will put you in a position where you can't snap them for all their cubes the next round. So
Mm-hmm. Next up, I wanted to talk about cards that just seem to be generic best in slot. And the examples I've got here are Jeff, the Baby Land Shark, and Doctor Doom. At 2 and 6, these cards are just the best cards in their slot. Like, if you're just looking for, like, I need a 6-drop, all right, try Doom, right? I need a 2-drop, all right, try Jeff. You usually need a specific and compelling reason to go away from those things. And I bring this up because we have Mobius coming out. Mobius might actually threaten Jeff's spot here. Alioth came out. Some people may argue that Alioth is threatening Doctor Doom's spot here. And I think that it is an interesting conversation to have when we think about it in the context of like, A, is it okay to have these cards? And B, what does it mean that so many of them seem to be like prohibitively expensive? Of the 4 cards that I listed, Doctor Doom is the only one in Series 3. And I don't think I'm expecting series drops in October either. So, like, people complain about best in slots, but I think actually they should be grateful. At least one of them is like a card you basically get for
yeah,
free, Doctor Doom, right? Like I almost wonder if there's I like they buffed Forge, right? Like it's not like they do this on purpose. They go back and they buff cards to like make them competitive, but it is sort of interesting that both of the cards that you have as like generic best in slots, Doom and Alioth, both of them allow you to just get free wins on those locations where like stuff is closed off. And I think that's like an underrated part of Marvel Snap is just, oh, I get a free win here because I get to have this card, right? I get a free win out of this because I'm running Doom and you're running Magneto or whatever, and there's a Sanctum Sanctorum. So do you think that in that context, Mobius could dethrone Jeff off that 2 slot, or if it's still gonna be like, I need a card, let's just play Jeff?
I think okay. So firstly, I want to mention Alioth. I don't think Alioth is actually best in slot for 6. I don't think it's anywhere close to as good as Doom because like if you look at Jeff, you look at Doom. These cards are like sort of like the best in slot choices because they are generally actively proactive, right? Like you don't really care what deck your opponent is playing. You don't really care what your opponent has done, right? You can play a Jeff. You almost always can play a Doom. They are almost always good. So like I feel like best in slot cards usually have like very universal like purposes. Like Alioth is a bit more like curated towards you having to be like only losing on that one lane or that kind of thing, whereby you can play Alioth for some benefit. So I don't think Alioth can compete with Doom in terms of that best in slot potential. Mobius, on the other hand, is one of those cards that I feel it actually affects a lot of things, right? It affects Zabu, affects Loki, affects Like even helps with location sometimes, Mobius. So I feel
Elysium,
like
the Raft.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So Mobius actually does compete with Jeff in the best in slot potential slot because like it does so many things, right? And I don't know if it will be actually better than Jeff, but like I think it's actually a necessary card to own because like whenever the meta like just goes a bit crazy and with cost reductions and stuff like that, there is a Mobius there to keep things in check. So I have hopes that Mobius will be one of those like, well, I wouldn't say have hopes, but like I do think that Mobius will actually be one of those cards that would be very close to auto include in many decks.
Speaking of Alioth, I feel like a lot of people, probably more than the card deserves, frankly, have been saying, oh, Alioth, it's so broken, it's so OP. And I just wanted to provide my perspective here and bring Lamby in, of course, to provide his. I feel that Alioth is like basically perfectly fine. It's like kind of annoying to deal with, but it's not like actually overpowered in the way that something like Loki is. Alioth is a card that makes certain decks a little bit stronger. It'll juice you for 8 cubes some of the time, but I don't necessarily think that it is a card that deserves a nerf. I think at 5, it requires enough in terms of the priority game to be playable around. But I will note that I think a lot of the cards people tend to really hate playing against are cards that require you to play the priority game, right? So Alioth is one of those cards that you can counter if you have priority a lot of the time, but you can't counter if you don't. And when you feel like you have no options, I think that leads to naturally an outcry of like the card is broken. I remember when I was talking to Glenn, I was consistently surprised at how much he characterized things like playing for priority as high level gameplay. But if I would assume he would know, and if you think of playing for priority as something that only like legitimately decent players know, I can totally understand how you can get to a point where you think, oh, this card is just ridiculous. I didn't even get to do anything on the final turn of the game. That's crazy. And like not understanding that, like, okay, well, I have priority here. I can just Cosmo or armor that lane, or I can go into the other lanes with the Doctor Doom, or whatever it is that you come up with. I do think that Alioth's one major negative contribution to the meta has been the rise of more Galactus decks. Uh, Everyone hates playing against that. Like that's basically been consistent. Everyone does not like playing against Galactus, and it is a solid list right now, and I can't argue with that. So I do think there is that negative to Alioth, but Alioth on its own seems to mostly go in either Galactus decks or like very copium mid-range decks that get hosed by Loki.
Yeah, no, so the funny thing is, all the mid-range decks that play Alioth, I tried them out and I realized that I actually think they are better without the Alioth. Like, till this day, I still think they're actually better without the Alioth. Because, like, that one slot where you play your 6, I think the Doom as a 6 is still, like, better. Like, I feel like every time you have to decide between playing Doom or Alioth in a mid-range deck, the Alioth doesn't really always do that much. In the Galactus deck, of course, that one is just inevitability, right? Galactus goes off,
Yeah.
Alioth, GG. That one, that's a bit uninteractive and annoying. But like you said earlier, I feel like Alioth is one of those cards that if you know they have it and you know that it's something they can use to win, you can sort of set up your game plan to not just straight up lose to it. Like I'm not saying that you can always like get initiative, but like you know that that's their win condition. You don't put yourself in a position to like just die on that one lane, like it's not as
Yeah.
difficult to do as people think. You just need to know that it has to be done. So Alioth, I feel, should not even need to be nerfed. I mean, the last time they tried to nerf Doom, it became a 5/4/4 and it was horrible.
Awful.
So
Yeah.
it was horrible. So I really don't want Alioth to become like a 6/2 or 6/3. That's just trash. So I think it can stay at a 6/5. I think once people get used to playing against it, or maybe like, I don't know, the popularity of collectors drops a little bit, no one will really complain about Alioth ever again.
So, in terms of where we are now in the meta, I think a lot of people sort of misunderstand what people mean when they say, like, a card like Loki is broken or a deck like Loki is broken. It does not mean the deck is uncounterable, it just means it's sort of unprofitable to try. There are absolutely some counters to Loki out there, they just run into some issues in a lot of other matchups. I wanted to talk about a couple of the counters that still currently exist. The major one, to my mind, is Cerebro 3. I do think that both Living Tribunal and Hela, or Hela Tribunal decks, if you were running both, took a big hit from Alioth being able to just nuke the Hela card, the Tribunal card, especially the Tribunal, because Tribunal is just a very
Yep.
telegraphed game plan. You go Wave into Onslaught, into Iron Man, into Tribunal, and it's like, yes, that's the lane I'm going to, Alioth. So they took a lot of splash damage from Alioth, leaving Cerebro 3 the main contender in terms of like, when I'm playing Loki, that is the one deck where I'm like, oh, I actually am not favored here. Like, I am actually like, okay, this is actually like a tough matchup because they are just weird enough. And they still aren't playing, for the most part, Iron Man, which is a good card to get off of Loki. There's like this, they're just weird enough and they're just strong enough that when they get Cerebro, they probably will beat you. And I do think that that is a very compelling space to be in. The issue, of course, that the deck has is like, it's very questionable into a lot of other decks. And I do think that there's something to be said for a dynamic there where, like, I think Cerebro 3 is probably like a 50% win rate deck or below, but it does beat Loki. So, like, I kind of almost wonder if there'd been tournaments this whole time, if we'd be seeing placements from Cerebro 3. It feels like the kind of deck you don't really want to play on ladder at this point, but it might be exactly the kind of thing you would play in a tournament meta with Loki. What do you think?
So I wanna say firstly that yes, I do agree. I've had my fair share of defeats to Cerebro 3. You never really wanna Loki them unless you are buffing a collector.
Yeah.
Because their deck is just horrible to steal on your part. Uh and on another note, the whole Cerebro 3 in tournaments thing, I wanna say that I don't think it will work
You
because
don't
the
think
thing
so?
is like let's say it's a Swiss tournament 7 rounds, right? Like you just have to hit 2 rounds that are not Loki and your deck is just unfavored into like most things, right? Like it's horrible into I think Cerebro is just horrible into collectors. Like they can't do
Yeah.
anything.
It,
So like
yes.
yeah, they can't do anything. So I feel like Cerebro decks you can play it into Loki. It will work your favored, I don't deny. But like in a tournament, as long as you don't hit that Loki matchup like once or twice, you're kind of screwed. So I don't really like it outside of in the Loki matchup specifically. But another deck that I think is potentially decent into the Loki matchup is the Shuri Sauron deck. There's a few things I
Hold
would
on, hold on.
say. Yeah,
I wanna jump in here because it's okay, but like it's not like Cerebro 3. Like if I see Shuri Sauron, I'm like, okay, yeah, I can handle
yeah,
this.
it's not as difficult.
Like
Yeah,
it's
for
not.
Loki.
It's like if I feel like that is the kind of matchup that's like at best 50-50 for the Shuri player. Because it's like, yeah, I know I'm still in this. I've got this. Like if they especially if like they're a Red Skull deck, right? Especially the red. I feel like the Red Skull versions are like particularly easy to play against because they just tell you, all right, look, here's the number you have to beat. Can you beat the number? And then if you can beat the number, you win a ton of cubes because you flip that lane. I don't know. I think I'm a lot more scared of like someone going Shuri Vision than I am like Shuri Red Skull at this point.
I mean, the thing about the Shuri Sauron deck is that firstly, when you Loki them, you tend to have like two dead cards, right? Which is the Sauron and Ebony. I say both are
Yeah.
dead because like you don't really have time to play the Sauron first and then the Ebony, because like you probably want to play something big on that turn anyway. I think one of the reasons why firstly the Loki deck doesn't run Shang anymore. So I think one of
Yes.
the reasons why the Shuri Sauron deck is still very strong is because there's this level of inevitability, which is like if they have Shuri Taskmaster, Shuri Red Skull Taskmaster, right? I feel like if you are stealing that, but they're doing it first, you don't have time to actually get all that stats out. So I feel like that's like a bit inevitable for the Loki deck. But of course, if you have everything, you have the Loki, you have the Quinjet, you can steal their stuff on turn 4 and play like 2 energy Shuri, 3 energy Red Skull, which is mad. So like, so I mean that one is a bit too much. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I feel like yeah, that's a potential deck that you can actually play into Loki and be decent into. Like
Yes, you
them.
could be decent into it with that. It's like a deck that I highlighted it way back when I did my video on decks to play into Loki, where it's like this one actually you can play into Loki and you can play it into other decks, which is crazy because most decks you can play into Loki are not playable into other decks. But
Yeah.
this one actually is quite solid. I have no real issues with you running it. I do think one of the things that I've been trying to kick around is like, why are so many of these Shuri Sauron decks running Enchantress? Do you know what's up with that? Like, it feels weird to me because that card doesn't seem good, but I get why it's in there, but like, couldn't that just be like a card that was good instead?
Okay, so the funny thing is, I think it's Tien from like SD or
Yeah.
like ByteDance. He posted the list and everyone just net deck the deck with the Enchantress. But like that was then, right?
Yeah.
Enchantress now doesn't really do anything. Like yes, you can say you're gonna Enchantress your Red Skull, Enchantress your Mary, Enchantress your Lizard. It doesn't happen because like if you were to do that, it means you're not playing Shuri on 4, and like
Yep.
there's nothing better than playing Shuri on 4. So
Yep.
I've been cutting the Enchantress for a ton of things, even sometimes Titania, because like in the mirrors, like having the extra 1 cost card is really strong, like for that 5+1 potential.
Yeah, I'm a
So
I'm a Nebula believer personally, but yeah.
I'm just not an Enchantress believer because like
Yeah.
there's nothing to hit, right? And like the scenarios of like hitting your own Red Skulls means you're already losing because you're not playing Shuri. So
Yup. Let's talk about a subject near and dear to both of our hearts, and it's that wave is cope when you're trying to beat Loki, for the reason that if the Loki player even slightly suspects that you are going to wave them, they will play Loki on turn 4 and then just be ahead of you when you wave, because you spent your turn 5 playing a 3/3, and they spent their turn 5 playing your entire deck. So, what is up with all the wave decks? Why are so many people running this right now when it doesn't beat a Loki player who has any idea what they're doing? Why are so many people convinced that it does, Lamby?
I honestly want to put this nicely, but I cannot because like it doesn't work on me at all. But it's been working on a lot of people, which is because it's very simple. Like I don't think a lot of people playing the Loki deck know how to beat Wave yet. I know it's supposed to be a very simple thing to do, but like I think Wave is working quote unquote because a lot of people don't know what's going on still. Like they know that they're playing against an HE deck, right? They
Yeah.
still like maybe Loki on 5 or like they don't Loki on 4, whatever. Like it's working just because a lot of people don't know what's going on. But honestly, if you are like a decent player, it's not supposed to work because
Yeah.
like waving when you wave a Loki deck, like if they know you're a wave deck, right? They know it's coming, especially if it's like a high evo wave deck. High evo wave decks, they literally must wave on 5.
Yeah.
The whole deck rests along waving on 5 to like get energy float and stuff like that. So you know it's coming. So like I mean, as long as you know it's coming, you can really plan around it. And there are so many ways to play Loki which don't even involve like getting caught with a bunch of cheap cards in your hand, right? You could like just like dump stats onto the Angela lane. You could just like I don't know, just play cards, man. Just play a lot of
Yeah.
cards. They play wave on 5. You play cards, and you have more stats than the wave
Yeah.
because it's a weak card. So like, I don't really know how to explain this, but like, I really feel like wave is just super overrated when it comes to dealing with Loki. And like,
It's
wave
yes.
is technically a tempo loss on turn 5. If you think about it, it's 3 energy. You don't always get to pair it with a good 2 cost card, you know. So a lot of the times it's a tempo loss.
In Evo decks, especially, you basically never get to pair it with a good 2 cost card because the entire
Yes.
deck is soaking, right? The entire deck is Sunspot and Misty Knight and Cyclops and the Hulk in your hand, and you actually never have an alternative. And like that's the thing that really gets me about Evo decks is like if you see any high Evo card, it's like, all right, well, they're gonna wave me on 5 every time. The deck doesn't have alternatives to that, or at least if it does have alternatives, they're not better, right? Like they're not the kind of thing that playing around a wave on 5 won't also play around. Like what are they going to do on turn 5? Play high evolutionary? Okay. Like they don't have another play there, right? Like there's like their best option in those spots is like, all right, I'm gonna wave on 4 into like 2/6s. That's how they maximize their power there. And it's like that's like not even that good when you're getting Loki'd on, right? Like that's not
Yeah,
even
no,
that
because like if
good.
they wave you on 4, they wave you on 4, you know you're gonna Loki on 4 anyway. Then you get one of the
Yeah.
sixes, you play the 6 at the same time as them, and you're
Yep.
not actually that far behind, right? At the end of
Nope.
the day.
And
So
it's just like, oh, okay. Like that's the best thing they can do to not do wave on 5, and it's not very good. The way I will forgive viewers of this for being caught out by like waves in the move deck. You shouldn't be, but it's like, okay, fine. But if you get caught out by a wave in a high Evo deck, I will not forgive you. You deserve that L. Finally, let's move on to everyone hates the meta. This is one of the most hated meta games, I feel like, in a decent amount of time. And what's interesting to me is there seem to be two main reasons for this: the Loki decks and the Galactus decks. And I think it's interesting because, like, most content creators that I know, people who play the game a lot, people who are good at the game, tend to hate it because of the Loki decks. They tend to be like, oh my God, I can't do anything about this. And then when you look on Reddit, it's like Galactus, right? It's the things that are making the game not fun to play. And I think it's interesting that, like, these two incredibly binary decks are the ones that are dominating the metagame. Like, Loki is like a fundamentally like anti mid-range deck. And Galactus is also kind of a fundamentally anti mid-range deck where it's just like, ha ha ha, answer me or die. Right? And that is the kind of thing that I think a lot of people don't enjoy in card games. It's interesting because to me, we went from probably the best Marvel Snap meta we've ever had, this like very interactive, evolving mid-range meta where everyone was building around Shang-Chi and then saying, all right, I'm the un-Shang-Chi-able points deck. All right, okay, I'm doing more un-Shang-Chi-able points in my Brood deck. And then we never got to a point where it was like, all right, how do we attack the Brood deck? Maybe we can restrict them on board space or something. That would have been like an interesting angle, I feel like. Instead, we went straight to that deck's unplayable now because Loki. And I do wonder if there's just like certain types of players who are just going to find that always fundamentally unsatisfying.
Yeah, I know. So, firstly, I want to agree that like, I feel like we went from one of the best metas. Okay, I wouldn't say this is the worst meta, but like the previous meta was great, right? It was
It was
like
so
Thanos
good.
controls Zabudak Hawk into Silk deck, into Brood deck. Like there was that progression of like every few weeks there was a new best deck, and then people were like adapting.
Yeah.
Now I feel like Loki is just too far ahead of the curve because firstly the energy cheat is crazy. Loki is a 3/5. You have like hard carries like Angela, Collector just going mad. Like Loki is just way ahead of the pack. And also Galactus Alioth has this inevitability whereby if it happens you just die. You can't do anything about it, So I understand why people are unhappy in general because there's not a lot of room to compete with these decks aside from being like complete hatred decks, right? Like you have to bring like decks that
Cerebro
just completely,
3!
yeah, you just have to play Cerebro 3. And Cerebro 3 was never a popular like
No.
meta defining force, right? So I can tell that I can see why people are like a bit annoyed because like they can't play their like just other generic good decks. Like if you play Zabuda Hawk now, it's just like struggling. You can play Shadow King in the deck, but it's still struggling. But I'm just very curious. Do you think this is worse than pre-nerf Zabu with Absman, Spider-Man, or what?
Okay, I used to, right? Before I figured out that Loki mirrors were not just pure RNG. Like they kind of are. Like at the top end, fundamentally, the fun thing about card games, and maybe the not so fun thing about card games, is when two equally good players play, it actually is a coin flip. Like
Yeah, of course.
it actually is a coin
But it's not
flip,
very
right?
often that two people are equally
Yes.
exactly that good. Yeah.
But like,
So
if two people, when it comes to Loki, right, like the range of how good you have to be is pretty wide, I think, right?
yes.
Like, if one player, like, if I played you, and let's say you're better than me, right? I don't know how much, but let's say you are. If I played you and I got Loki off the Loki, well, you're probably dead if you didn't, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
you're probably dead, and it kind of doesn't even matter, right? And like there are things that do matter. Like I know we both prefer different builds of the Loki build. I know my build is more aimed at the mirror. I know yours is not, and so I would feel favored in a matchup against you just on deck building, right?
Mhm.
But the issue that we would have is the range of skill. Like I feel like most people who are in the top, I don't know, 1,000, if they get a better Loki hand than me, I'm probably just dead. Like, and that's probably, and like I would say it's probably even more than the top 1,000. Like I do feel like there is a little bit of like, okay, nothing I do matters, and I think that feeling is the kind of feeling that people are going to want to avoid in card games, right? Like no one wants to feel like nothing they do matters. That's why everyone hates Galactus Alioth, right? And so I think that that's the reason that a lot of like good players are sick of Loki, is because it's like, all right, I'm supposed to be really good, but like it doesn't even matter if we're playing a mirror and I get unlucky. It just doesn't matter at all. And I think there's probably an increase in that feeling between Galactus, between Loki mirrors, between playing against Loki, where it's like, I'm like I talked to a content creator who's like, yeah, I built a Patriot deck to beat Loki, and then they Loki'd me, and I got 1-cost Patriot, 3-cost Blue Marvel, and I died. And it's just like, yeah, I feel like that sort of thing is not particularly fun. And I feel like going all out to beat the Loki matchup with stuff like Phoenix Force or Cerebro 3 leaves you so vulnerable to like every other matchup to the point that it's sort of unproductive to do anything but play Loki. And I think a lot of people who play a lot don't like being put in that box because, you know, you're streaming on Twitch 5 days a week. You don't want to play Loki the entire time, except if you want to go anywhere, you kind of have to. And I think that's the thing that people are gonna like. That's the thing that I think people chafing a little bit about this meta.
Yeah. So I think just want to add one thing to that, which is I do agree that the limiting of options in the current meta because of Loki and Galactus Alioth is a problem. Like because you can't play like a variety of decks to actually still win. That I agree. But I feel like when it comes to feeling helpless and like not being able to do anything, I think it was actually worse when it was Brute Absman deck, like when it was the Brute Absman deck, because that one was lower skill, and
Yeah.
you are also still equally as helpless if it happens,
Yes.
right? Forge Brute Abs. So when it comes to comparatively to that, I feel like I would rather be in this Loki meta whereby it's still variance, yes, but like there is no like fixed set of like draws that I know I'm for sure dead. Like okay, yeah, I mean Collector Loki, but like it's not as clear cut as Forge Brute
Right.
Abs, you know, you
But
just
like
die.
Forge
So
Brute Abs was like attackable, right? It was like Forge Brute Abs, you were like, all right, I can build decks for this. I can play Shuri Kitty, right? And then I can actually have a line against that. With Loki, it's like, oh no, you can't. Like, you have to play bad decks if you want to beat this consistently. And that's a little awkward.
true. I think the biggest difference is like it's a bit like what you said as well, because for Forge Brute Abs, if they draw that, you know you have to leave, right? But like
Unless
for
you are
Loki
on a
decks,
deck that can beat it, right? Like unless you're
correct.
built to beat it. Yeah.
Yeah. But for Loki decks, when they Loki you, you still need to think a bit like, is it actually a leaf? Because I don't know what they got, and this like uncertainty is a bit
Yes.
annoying sometimes. And I think like good players don't like this like uncertainty. It's like the closed deck list and open deck list thing, right? Like because with closed deck list it's like Loki, right? After they Loki you, it's a closed deck list. It's not like perfect information as anymore, and then like you're a bit like concerned. But I feel like that also gives the game some level of like, I don't know, beauty, because I feel like if you have perfect information, it's just perfectly solved. So I
Yes.
mean, Loki is RNG, but at the end of the day, I think it's not too much still.
I'll be honest, I think it's one of the most fun decks I've ever played.
Same, I love
Like,
it.
I think it's so fun. Like, there's so many like unique problem solving
We are
situations.
probably the only two content creators that really love this deck as much as we do. Like no one, like I can keep saying
It's
this deck is fun, and
fun.
like
It is. Like
no one
it
will agree with me, I
is.
think, but like I
It
still love
is
it.
fun. Like the way you have to problem solve on the fly with like you have 90 seconds to figure out how to use these random cards. Like, do you want to make a Professor X play on turn 4 or something? Like, do you want to like do a bunch of weird stuff? Do you want to just play for
Yeah,
points? Like that, like you have to sort of envision the entire rest of the game immediately. And also, what you're doing is so fundamentally powerful because it's all discounted. So you get to feel smart and also win a ton, which
yeah.
is like exactly what players like you and I are looking for. Like, you get to feel smart, regardless of whether you're being smart. You get to win a lot. So
Yeah, dude,
that I
you
think.
just said one thing that no one has ever said before about the Loki
Mm,
matchup, which is like the fact that you are getting a power of randomness that you need to figure out on the fly.
yes.
It's like it's discounted, yes, but it's not always that you know exactly what you are getting, right? So like the fact that
Yes.
you're actually playing the Loki and then you have to win with the randomness, and you
Yes.
don't know, like sometimes you even have to snap before you play the Loki, right? So you snap, you get the play the Loki, and then you see the cards and you're like, okay, now I need to think how to win this game that I just snapped, you know, that kind of thing.
Yes.
It's not as clear cut as people think.
No, like I want to be clear. The card is overpowered. The deck is
It is,
overpowered.
it
Like,
is, it
you
is.
are like we're not gonna let anyone quote us out of context here and be like Cam and Lamby think it's hard to play Loki. Shut up. All right.
It's a good
It
card. It's a
is.
very strong card.
It is hard to play Loki. It's also just really, really easy to play Loki. Like, yeah, it's hard to play Loki 100% optimally, right?
Yes.
That's what we're getting at, right? It's very, very easy to just put Loki in your deck and win a lot of games, though. Like, it is very, very easy. but a lot of the fun of the deck comes from figuring out the 100% optimal lines as opposed to the 95% optimal lines, which related, by the way. I checked the stats on StatFan. Did you know after Infinite, Loki has a higher played win rate than the Infinaut and Living Tribunal? Played win rate. That's so messed up, man. Like, what? Why? How is that possible?
Really
that's
messed
so
up, actually.
That's so
Especially the
messed
Infinite
up.
one, right? The Infinite one is
it's
hilarious.
like a card you only play when you have perfectly set it up and you are positive it's going to win you the game, and it has a lower played win rate than Loki.
Yeah.
So like, don't get us wrong. The card's messed up, but like, also it provides a very varied gameplay experience. Oh my god, we went so far over. Fuck me.
Well.
Dude, it's 40 minutes.
Oh shit.
Fun. Okay. As always, y'all, this has been 8 Cubes. I've been KM Best. This has been Lamby Series. We went long today. I apologize for that. I normally try to get these around 30 minutes if we can get it. This one went significantly longer. We ended up talking a lot on that last one, I feel like. But as always,
it's fun.
It was fun. Like, we had, like, I don't know. Maybe I'll stop freaking out when we go long. Maybe I'll just be like, all right, that's what it is. Or alternatively, I could keep it and we could do it as a bit where like every time we go past 30 minutes, I get more and more stressed over the course of it until I'm eventually losing my hair when we hit like 40. I feel like that would be a solid bit. All right. I have been Cam Best. He has been Lamby Series, and we will see you in the next one.